Hello, everybody. Can everyone hear me okay? You might be having a little bit of trouble. Some people are having a hard time hearing. Mostly looks all right. Heather and Emma are providing us technical support today, so they'll be responding in the chat box if you're having some difficulties, and hopefully can get you all set up. I'm going to get us started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Shauna McEachern, and I'm with the Provincial Systems Support Program at CAMH. And my role is the Implementation Manager, and I'm also the Project Manager for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. So I have the opportunity to work with Dr. Joanna Henderson and our backbone team across the province as we work with communities to implement Youth Wellness Hubs in this province, recognizing that a lot of you are also doing similar work. So it's very exciting to be kicking off this two-part mini-series. The next session will be in August, and I believe we'll be providing the information as well, kind of in the chat box, so just keep an eye out for it, and that will be with Dr. Joanna Henderson. So we're going to follow up to this session today. And what we're hoping to do today is just to give you a bit of a high-level sense of what the core components of Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario are and why they're the components that we're working with. We're really hoping that over the next couple of years, as we work to roll out this work in Ontario, we can also learn from all of you that are doing this work and collectively sort of go on this journey together where we can align and continue to build on each other's knowledge of what integrated youth services should look like for our province. So it's very exciting. It's exciting work, and I'm excited to be sort of starting this conversation with you. Just advance my slides. There we go. So these are the 10 currently funded sites through the Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario initiative. You can see them there. So some of these sites were existing sites that were already doing some research related to integrated youth services in Ontario, or who were part of a pan-Canadian initiative called Access Open Minds, and I think we have some of our Access partners on the line today as well, so welcome. And so these are the sites that are considered demonstration sites for the province. This was an initiative that rolled out a couple of years ago, and it's funded through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. It's also funded through a lot of philanthropic efforts, the Graham Beck Foundation as an inaugural funder, and many other philanthropic partners, including the CAMH Foundation, who are working to support these initial sites as they implement integrated youth services. The selection of these sites was really multifaceted, and we had a lot of interest from across the province. We had about 45 communities who expressed interest in being part of Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. So it was a very challenging process that we had to go through to sort of land on these initial sites. But part of the rationale for selecting the sites that we have is that we really wanted to understand if this type of model was going to work for most communities, most youth in those communities, most families in those communities, most of the time. So we have sort of a very diverse set of sites that we're working with, and you can find out more information about our sites on youthhub.ca. We go into a little bit more detail about those sites, and we'll be updating that website very shortly as our sites are beginning to be poised to provide services. So it's really exciting, and you can see a little bit more about the service provision that you can expect at each of these sites in the coming months. I'm also going to try to respond as I move through this to any questions that come up in the chat box. So if you have questions, please type them in. I'd like to try to make it as interactive as possible on a webinar, and I'll be leaving a little bit of time at the end for a few questions as well. If I'm not able to get to all your questions, we also have a community of practice, which Emma and Heather will be providing at the end of the webinar, and we'll follow up with some questions and responses to those questions on the community of practice. So what are core components, and why do we have them? So core components are really essentially what we're trying to aim as standardized aspects to all of the sites, so all of the 10 sites. They're multifaceted. We have 13 core components for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. Many integrated youth service models from across this country and internationally also have core components, and ours, we've tried to align them as best as possible with what was already existing, primarily nationally through the BC initiative of Foundry, but also the Pan-Canadian initiative Access Open Minds. But we've also contextualized some of the core components to what we know about the province of Ontario and what we also learned from others that are doing this work in our province who aren't necessarily part of a formally funded structure, but who have done a lot of learning and evaluation of integrated youth services as they move to implement them. We also heard a lot from youth and took a lot of what we've learned from the research and literature, which we'll provide at the end of this webinar. So you'll get a list of sort of the resources and references that we've used to compile these core components. I'll talk a little bit about those sort of multifaceted areas of evidence that informed how we did this work. But really the core components are those standardized aspects. The work that we did to develop these core components was really around bringing all of that work together, all of that evidence together, delineating those, trying to figure out what the thematic areas were, and then articulating them in the way that we knew could be put into practice. So it sort of took all of that evidence and all of that thinking that has informed all of this work and then articulated them into this is our expectation of what this might look like in practice. And I'll talk a little bit, and you'll see it's a bit of a running theme as I move through this. We always talk about, and we talk about this with the sites as well, what the balance is or what's the appropriate balance between having something that's standardized, that can be recognized, that has a quality of service related to it, that can be expected from youth and their families, that same quality of service that we should see across all sites, while still having that balance with local contextualization and what makes sense for a community and what's going to be feasible within a community. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So as I said, we have 13 core components. You can see them listed here. So what I'll do this webinar is I'm actually just going to move through these components and give you a little bit of context about each of them, why they're a component, and what they mean in relation to how we're putting them into practice with sites. So we have integrated governance, partner collaboration, integrated location, evidence-based or evidence-generating service, youth engagement, youth-centered and developmentally appropriate services, family engagement, use of standardized measures and outcome evaluations, brand adoption, organizational capacity, approach, and culture operating with equity-based principles, equitable and inclusive access and physical space, equity data use, clinical and cultural specific services that reflect the population groups. So actually, if you look at those components that we have there, they're sort of grouped into different types of themes. And so one of those themes is integration. We'll talk a little bit about integration and what that means. Another one is around service provision. So what do we expect from the service, or the quality? What's the quality of service that we want to see through YU, which we affectionately term Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. There's a theme around engagement. We'll talk about that a little bit. There's a theme around fidelity, and there, again, we're kind of getting into that piece around standardization and contextualization and achieving the appropriate balance. And then there's a piece around equity. And one of the things that we've done from the very beginning, and as we developed these initial core components, was really focused on embedding equity throughout all aspects of Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario and the model for this province. And we'll break those down a little bit more as we move forward. So as I said, we had a lot of different types of evidence that sort of came together to feed the development of these 13 core components and help us really determine why they needed to be the components that we landed with. So one area of evidence was research. So we looked at the research that was existing in the system. Dr. Joanna Henderson obviously spent a lot of time, her life's work kind of thinking about and researching youth services and the services within our province and what they need to look like for young people and their families. A lot of great research already existing in this area, so that was something that kind of fed into these core components. Another piece was around consultation. And so not separate from research, because a lot of that research was done with young people and their families, but also as an additional piece to that, a lot of consultation with youth. So consulting with youth from across this province, consulting with families across this province to really understand what's not working in the system. Where are we seeing sort of the breakdown in our system, and how can we enhance that? What would a system that's built for young people and by young people really look like? And so we had a lot of feedback, a lot of thinking from youth, a lot of themes around enhancing access, creating services that really reflected who they were, that they could see themselves mirrored in, and really understanding sort of the balance of needing to approach it as a distinct point of access and a distinct system that was developmentally informed. It wasn't a child system and it wasn't an adult system. It was really centered around youth who have their own distinct needs and are really in their own distinct group that need health care and mental health care in a way that's different. And then the other aspect was a practice profile. So when we talk about a practice profile, it's actually an implementation science process that we brought in. And so one of the ways that we're supporting this work is supporting it through a backbone. And so a backbone is really something that's there to support sites as they move through this process. The backbone for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario is a kind of a combined backbone with support from the Provincial System Support Program, where I'm located, and the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health. So both of our teams sort of working together as supporters of system change to work with the expertise of sites as they move this forward in their communities to really help them bring an implementation approach to the work that they're doing so that we can embed sustainability from the beginning. And we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But this combined backbone brings that implementation expertise. And the practice profile is one of the tools that we use within implementation science. And maybe Emma or Heather, maybe we can put a little link in the chat box to NERN, which is the National Implementation Research Network. We do a lot of work in implementation science and have a practice profile tool that we sort of built off of and adapted a little bit for this purpose. But really what the practice profile allowed us to do was sort of consolidate all of that thinking. It kind of brings you through a process of thinking through what would be a gold standard of implementation. So if you took one of those core components that we have for this work, what would that look like in a sort of pie in the sky kind of gold standard version? And allows us to move back and say, okay, and then we're working with the system we have and the resources that we have. And so within that context, what's really feasible, what's something that's feasible that we could do. And so for the purpose of Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, we call that our target implementation. And so each of these 13 core components has a target implementation that all sites have agreed to, that we're collectively working forward together to try to achieve. And that target implementation really articulates what we expect in relation to seeing that component operationalized and put into practice. Over sort of in our blue box on this slide, you can see that we have the principles of equity and measurement or measurement-based care that are driving all aspects of our components. So they're actually components within themselves, or a couple of components within our 13 components are focused specifically on measurement and equity, but as a framework, they're actually embedded throughout the work. And so really what was driving the services and the service delivery and service provision models that we have is a measurement-based care system. And our measurement-based care system aligns with the other Canadian Integrated Youth Service Model systems, which is the DACIMA system. So if people are interested in DACIMA, it's D-A-C-I-M-A. And so that's a data measurement-based care system that we're using, that Foundry is using, and that Access Open Minds is also using. We are working on, sorry, I lost you guys for a second there. We are working on ensuring that we have some alignment around our indicators so that we can also roll up information at a national level. So really trying to work with our national partners to really understand not only our provincial system, but also a collective national system as well, and what we need for young people and families across Canada. So that measurement-based care aspect drives the work. It allows us to ensure quality of service. We'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to use data to inform service as we move through the core components. And then also equity. So we have frameworks and principles that are overarching that guide all aspects of our work. We have an equity strategy for Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario that we use to align sort of all outputs and that we're delivering through this work. And within that equity framework, you see principles such as a focus on anti-oppressive practice, anti-racist practice, harm reduction, client-centered, developmentally informed, youth-centered care, and trauma-informed approach to service and care. So those are really some of our high-level equity principles that we built in from the very beginning to inform all of our work and the delivery of the Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario model. So we talked about this already, but as I said, it's really critical. And the purpose of these core components is to allow really a level of standardization that we feel is achievable across all of these 10 demonstration sites. But also the target implementation of each of these core components is flexible enough that it allows for that local contextualization. A lot of the sites that we're working with have a lot of strength and capacity that's already existing in these communities, and we really want to create a stage for that to be fostered and where we can support that, but with the full knowledge that these communities are moving forward, delivering on this model, as many other communities are across this province. So really it's trying to provide that supportive piece around from our backbone and through these core components so that we can have a model, a collective model, but one that isn't overly prescriptive and can be achievable in multiple locations and multiple different types of communities. And on the slide, you'll just see that. I already spoke about our target implementation, and that's what we're going for. So I spoke a little bit about implementation science and how the backbone is supporting through implementation science, and also with the support of the center supporting with some of the engagement work. But really, I won't go into a lot of detail about implementation science. As I said, I think Heather put up the website there for NERN. If you're interested in implementation science, you can check out the NERN website. But just to say that this is the way that we operate in terms of supporting system change across the province. So the backbone is a really multifaceted team that has evaluation support, implementation support, it has knowledge exchange and knowledge brokering support, equity support, administrative support. So all of these sort of multifaceted aspects, engagement support, are working as resources to these sites as they move to implement the model. And we go through basically 4 stages of implementation. They're listed there in a linear fashion. They're really not linear, as most of you will know, because you're working in sort of large-scale system change. But basically, sort of we start with this concept of exploration, where we're really just kind of figuring out the strengths and capacities and needs that are already existing, developing critical relationships, doing some sort of stakeholder enhancement as we think through what this needs to look like. We're focusing on how we're going to build in sustainability from the very beginning, determining what it is we're going to do, and how we're going to do it within the resources that we have. That sort of moves us into an installation stage, where we're really figuring out sort of the nitty-gritty details of who's going to be doing what, how it's going to look, what the resources are, what our plan of implementation is. So then that kind of brings us into an initial implementation stage where we're basically trying it out. We like to call this stage the fail forward stage. So you're making a lot of mistakes, you're learning from those mistakes. Another way to think about it is that we're doing quality improvement through this stage. We have a strong focus on quality, enhancement, learning, and growth. And then that brings us to a full implementation stage where basically this is now a new way of working. It's like a well-oiled machine. And we're really just focusing on sustaining and continuing to monitor and evaluate in an ongoing way. So I'll leave that there, but happy to sort of answer any questions about implementation science overall. But just to say, this is a kind of theoretical system change model that we're using to support sites. And recognizing the disclaimer is it's not linear like that, and it's not kind of as clean as I just made it sound in relation to those stages and the delineation between them. It's a process of change, and obviously what we're doing here and what we're trying to do through Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario is complicated work and complex system work, so it's multifaceted as well. So I'll move us into the actual 13 core components. Like I said, I'm going to try to be cognizant of time and keep it a little bit high level. There's also some context on the slides, just to allow for some opportunity for people to ask questions if they'd like. And then if you do have any questions or you're interested more specifically in any of the components, please feel free to reach out after. You can email us at info@youthhubs.ca, and Emma, maybe we can throw up that our email box or inbox, and happy to answer any questions post-webinar. So the first component that we have is integrated governance. And integrated governance is really about bringing people together around a purpose. So it's strategically coming together. So it's not just partners coming together for the sake of coming together. It's really coming together around something that's very specific and purposeful. And so in our case, this is around implementing a youth hub. And the way that our networks are structured for each of the sites is that it's an integrated network. And so what that means is that we want to see cross-sectoral partners from across the system coming together to basically make collective decisions to implement this hub. And really what we're going to see through integrated governance is more sustainability over time, is more ownership of the hub itself across the community, and these hubs really becoming a new way of working within a system of care because all of the partners within a community are involved in decision making, in determining next steps, in understanding processes and policies of how this hub is going to operate. So an integrated governance model can look many different ways. But really one of the fundamental pieces of it is that you have all of your critical partners who are going to be providing service informed about what's happening and in some way contributing to decision making. So that can be decision making around budget, it can be decision making around resources, it could be decision making around operations of the hub. So really multifaceted. Many of the sites have developed slightly different models for their integrated governance. And that's okay. It's really around that piece around collective decision making and everybody being informed about process. It's going to look a little bit different in each community because the model that we're working with here in Ontario is one that builds off of what's already in existence in communities. And so the partners that are already in existence in communities are sort of in-kinding their resources, time, and expertise to deliver on this model. And so whoever is around the table is going to be the people that comprise this integrated governance model. You can really see that it might look many different ways depending on the resources and partners that are existing in a community. That being said, if we kind of think about this within that exploration stage or that initial stage that we're moving through, you may also have some identification of partners who aren't at your table or those who you may want to expand your network to include. So then that stakeholder relationship building piece comes into play, and we'll talk about that a little bit on this next component. So the next one is partner collaboration. What we're talking about for partner collaboration is really building that stakeholder base. And so when we're talking about partnership, we're really talking about trusting relationships. We're talking about moving forward together with a common vision. And so our partner collaboration component is really focused on understanding who comprises your network in relation to those who are really part of decision making in implementing your hub, and thinking about who else needs to be there, thinking about the community at large, and really thinking about how this hub can become part of that community and what that needs to look like. So one of the things that we often think through in implementation is who are the partners and part of the network that are actually going to be delivering the services, and they are part of sort of your integrated governance or some version or model of your integrated governance. But then who are those that need to be informed or aware of what's happening in the hub and that it's happening so that they can really become part of your partners more broadly. Partners can span beyond the walls of a hub. They can make the hub part of the community. And we have really beautiful examples from sort of existing sites and other sites across the country where they've continued to invest in those partnerships and really create the hub as being part of the fabric of the community, and some really interesting and unusual partnerships that develop. And we've seen this as well with some of our sites where we have sort of garden centers involved, and we have hairdressers involved, and we have all of these partners that are not part of the typical fabric of sort of providing clinical services be part of the hub environment because it becomes part of the community in itself. Another piece of our model is really around integrated location. And so one of the things that we get asked a lot is when we talk about integration, does integration mean co-located? So when we say the services and the model is going to be integrated, sometimes the default is to expect that that means co-located, and actually they're slightly different things. And so that's why we have these as distinct components. Thinking about integration of process and partnership through our integrated governance component and our partnership collaboration component allow us to kind of get at that operational piece of how we want to work together. Thinking about integrated location is really then what do we want to see within the physical space itself. And so what we're talking about here is that we're talking about youth really being able to walk through one door and have access to this plethora of service. And we'll talk about kind of our core basket of services and what they are as we move to our other components. But what we're talking about here is that we're serving most youth most of the time in this location. So most of their needs are being met here. We're talking about a holistic approach to care. We're talking about one that's developmentally informed by young people. And one of the things actually that I should have mentioned in our integrated governance component was really about the involvement of youth and the involvement of families. And when we're talking about co-creating this model with young people and really making a model that's reflective of the needs of youth, we're talking about them being critically involved in all aspects of decision making as well. And so when I'm talking about that integrated governance component, part of that integrated governance and decision making is critical to have youth at that table, involve young people, and to involve families. And when we talk about the engagement principles, we'll get into that a little bit. So this integrated location piece is really about having all of those services or most of those services co-located, working together, having integrated teams. What we want to see here is sort of that fostering of integration within a physical space. And so having all of them co-located actually creates more of a team dynamic across all of these different organizations that are in-kinding services to support youth in this holistic, multifaceted way with a plethora of services, so it becomes a team. It's not a team that's inherently held within one organization. It's a team that crosses many organizations, many sectors, many types of services, and that co-location allows them to work in that agile, flexible way as this comprehensive team for youth. So co-location also is really important because it allows us to provide agility and flexibility in the types of services that we provide, the hours of service that we provide them, and how accessible those services can be. So with all of these services co-located and sort of in this one-stop shop under one roof kind of model, the ability for just being able to be much more dynamic and accessible to youth changing and adapting needs over time is enhanced. So the next core component is evidence-based or evidence-generating services. So this is really where we're focused on the service provision aspect. And you might kind of find this interesting that we have 13 core components, and although they talk about the model comprehensively, sometimes people are surprised that there's components that surpass service provision in itself in relation to the services. So this component is really focused on the services that we're providing and what services those are. So within Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, it's a mental health and addiction focused initiative. So we will be expecting all sites to have mental health and addiction services as well as substance use services. All sites will also be providing some form of primary care. Again, this looks different depending on the site, and that's why that target implementation is so important for these components. So we're articulating that this is something that we need to see, but we're not being prescriptive about exactly how it needs to look or how it needs to be delivered in relation to a role or how it's formulated within a community, because we recognize that different communities have different resources and different resources available to them. So we have that primary care aspect. We have an education, training aspect to the services that we want to see in sites as well. Again, this looks different. An employment aspect to all the sites, a peer support aspect to the site, so wanting to see peer support across our sites, a navigation and outreach aspect to all the sites, a family support and family services aspect to all of the sites. And when I talk about the family engagement component, I can talk a little bit about how that looks, because that looks a little bit different. And the way that we're balancing youth engagement and family engagement in this initiative is something that's been really informed through our provincial youth advisory and our provincial family advisory in terms of landing kind of in the right spot for this initiative, being one that we really want to make sure is focused, centered, and co-created with youth primarily, but informed by families and making sense for families as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So those are our components, those are our service components, so that's our basket of services. Some of those services are being delivered in what's considered an evidence-based way. So when there is an evidence-based or quality of service framework that guides one of those services, those specific services, we're aligning with that evidence-based framework. Some of those services are still new or emerging within our field, and if we think about peer support, that's one of those areas. And so there isn't necessarily a framework that we can apply in relation to quality of service or what that needs to look like across sites. And so what we're doing is pulling from best practice, working nationally with our partners, internationally with our partners, to develop and support sites in developing a framework for service provision in relation to that specific service. And then we're going to be sharing back in relation to collecting our data and understanding that service and outcomes related to that service, so it's evidence generating. So wherever we can be evidence informed, we are. Wherever we can be as evidence informed as possible, but really feeding back to the system and trying to generate evidence, we're going to be doing that. So youth engagement is a core component. It's really a cornerstone for the work that we're doing. We're really doing this to make a new system that is the system that youth tell us that they want. It's informed by really what we've heard from youth for decades now about the kind of system that they want to see. It continues to be informed at a local level through local youth advisories that are working directly with each site. It also continues to be informed by the provincial youth advisory as well. So youth engagement is a critical principle of what we're doing. We know that when youth are engaged in supporting the development of their services, they're more likely to access those services, they have better outcomes from those services, and they're more likely to stay engaged in those services. And so obviously this is a really critical piece for what we're trying to do and the initiative for our Youth Wellness Hub Ontario initiative. I already mentioned that we have advisories in place, so we have multifaceted, sort of multi-level advisories that are informing both local implementation of sites and development of sites, but also at that provincial level in relation to kind of really thinking through the direction and strategy of this initiative overall. Just to say that youth can be engaged in multiple levels, in multiple ways. They're co-developers of this initiative, and they are across different sites. It looks different. There's different types of youth models or youth engagement models depending on each site, but youth are engaged in things like deciding operations of the hub, supporting service delivery within the hub, thinking through the physical space of the hub, thinking through policies and procedures that the hub's going to use in operation, thinking about how to communicate about the hub, developing strategies for conducting outreach and engaging more youth in the hub. So really multifaceted ways that youth are engaged as co-creators within this initiative. Another aspect to this is youth-centered and developmentally appropriate services. And so really what we're talking about here is that piece that I was talking about earlier, where this really is a youth-focused initiative. We really need youth to walk through the doors and want to access services. And if we're not collectively creating something that young people are going to want to access, then nothing else matters after that point. So really the first and most paramount area of focus is ensuring that it's youth-centered. Another piece is that it's developmentally appropriate. And so our age range for Youth Wellness Hub Ontario is 12 to 25, with recognition that youth have different developmental needs at different points in time. We recognize that being a young person is really a period of a lot of transition and a lot of change inherently just in that stage of life. And so what we're trying to do here is meet young people where they're at, understand that there's a fluidity and a dynamicness to sort of that stage of life. where young people want services that really reflect where they are at in that journey, but also can be adaptable with them. So that model of sort of young people, waiting to access service and accessing service and needing to engage in service in a very sort of specific way within a certain amount of time, it's not working for youth, and we've heard it doesn't work for youth. They have changing lives, they have dynamic lives, and they need services that are matched to that. And so what we're trying to do through Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario is understand and respect that and co-create with young people a service that makes sense for them. And so what that means is that hours of operation might be slightly different. They'll reflect the needs of young people in the community. The way that you can enter a hub and sort of leave a hub and be fluid about engaging with service will be respected and be part of the model that we're implementing. So we recognize that young people might come into a hub one day to just kind of come in and be part or engage in the recreational aspect of a hub. They might come in the next day for service. They might not come back for months, and they might come back again, and we'll meet them where they're at when they come through the door again. And so that agility and that being developmentally focused and youth-centered is really a critical aspect to what we're trying to do here. And that really just means meeting young people where they're at in their journey. So family engagement is also a critical component of what we're doing, and we've taken a lot of support and guidance from our provincial family advisory, who has been really great in helping us think through that balance again, that this is really something that it needs to make sense for young people. It needs to feel and be something that is for them, by them, so that they'll engage with that service. But we recognize that families can be a critical part of a journey of a mental health and addiction journey for young people and really seeing the outcomes that they want to see. And so recognizing families as critical allies in that process has been really important. And so the way that we're trying to balance that and the way that we're working with families on that piece is having families really inform sort of thinking around access and enhancing access and what can be done to enhance access to the site so that families are aware, so that families can be champions of what the Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario initiative is delivering, what it's delivering at a provincial level, what it's delivering at a local level, engaging with families around pieces like the evaluation, how we use data, engaging families in relation to sort of processes or service pathways and what pathways does service look like and how we can make sure that that navigation piece is really enhancing an experience and enhancing access and not sort of building on an additional siloed system. And so thinking through pieces like that with families has been really advantageous, and it's been really a great way to engage families in this initiative and help them provide some guidance while still respecting that this is a youth-led initiative in relation to who its primary audience is for delivery of service. So that's been a really critical core component and something that has been honestly a learning over time about how this needs to look and has been, creating and garnering further clarity, I would say, from our families that are involved in this initiative, providing feedback and thinking. So definitely a growth journey piece. The other aspect I'll say actually as well, which is sort of interesting and just a good example of learning is family services and providing family services as one of our core basket of services for this initiative. So family services is a service that we want to provide, and many sites have been working with their local youth and family advisories to figure out how that can work and how that's going to make sense for youth in the community and families in the community, recognizing that that's a critical aspect and can also be a huge enhancement to a youth wellness journey. And so sites have been really thinking creatively with their local advisories about how to go about this. Some have kind of created an off-site location for families to access family services. Others are having family nights where there's services within the hub that are, a certain night of the week that's dedicated to families. And so really trying to think in really respectful ways about the needs of all the people that need to be accessing services at the hub and supporting those who are accessing services at the hub. So use of standardized measures and outcome evaluation. So this is really about our measurement-based care system. So I spoke about DASMA. We're using DASMA. And so really what we're focused on within Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario is using data to inform service. So what we're talking about here is really understanding the young people that are coming through the door, understanding what their needs are in relation to service, and then adapting and having agile service that can be responsive to that. And so what DASMA allows us to do is collect data and provide information and data to young people about themselves and what they want to see in service, so they have access to their own information and data, provides real-time data to service providers, and it provides rolled-up data to the hub overall. And really the purpose of all of that data is to inform the service delivery. And so our measurement-based care platform is critical for our quality of service, ensuring that we have that data that's continuously helping us enhance service, improve service, reflect on service. And so multifaceted, it's a iPad delivery system, so it's very user-friendly in terms of the interface, and we collect different types of data depending on what the reason for visit is. So we have a sort of a basket of tools that we're aligning as much as possible with other initiatives across Canada, again, so we can see that roll-up, as I said, so we can collectively tell the story about integrated youth services in our country, but really sort of using that data in an ongoing way to inform service. And when I talk about some of our equity-based components, you'll really see how it's going to help us make sure that we're serving the needs of diverse youth that walk through our doors. And one of the things that we always try to keep a lens to, especially for implementation, is that this is going to tell us who's walking through our doors and what their specific service delivery needs might be, so that we can ensure that we're always enhancing the services that we're providing, but it's not going to tell us about who isn't walking through our doors. So as we talk about the equity components, I'll kind of expand on that piece a little bit as well. Brand adoption, so one of the pieces that we're working through, and this is also probably a piece of learning for us, is brand adoption. And really the purpose of brand adoption, Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario was conceived as an interim name. It wasn't where we were anticipating landing with branding. It may not be where we land with branding. We are not at this point moving forward to finalize branding, but we are engaging in a process of hearing from young people, service providers and families from across the province about what a brand could be for this initiative. But really the purpose of sort of a brand alignment piece is twofold for us. First is so that it can enhance access. So that there's familiarity, fluency in relation to what it is that's being provided, recognition that these are connected, and then the other piece is really around quality of service. And so what we're trying to do is really ensure that for all of those core services and within kind of our overarching principles in these components, we have a quality of service metric that we're anticipating all sites achieving. And that brand adoption, or having a comprehensive brand, really ensures that young people can expect the same quality of service and understand what type of service and what type of quality of service they're going to achieve when they walk through the doors of Youth Wellness Hub Ontario. So organizational capacity, approach, and culture, operating with equity-based principles. So really this is around understanding sort of what I was saying earlier about who's walking through your doors and who's not walking through your doors. The way that we're supporting sites with this piece is through sort of an equity assessment, if you will. So it's sort of like a relationship assessment. So who's engaged, who isn't engaged, what some of the work that we need to do to ensure that the hub is reflective of the community beyond its walls, and really providing services and operating in a way that's appropriate in relation to culture and equity, but also enhancing those aspects within the hub environment as well. So I talked a little bit about some of our foundational principles and overarching frameworks. So those are things that we want to see within all aspects of the hub. This is really a reflective piece as well for sites. To kind of look at the data within the DASMA and also understand how they can improve services so that they can better meet the needs of diverse youth over time. Many of our sites have a lot of strength in delivering services from an equity-based lens, and supporting different subpopulations of youth and their families. And so this is really that commitment to this in an ongoing way over time. Some of the things that we can think about in relation to how we can build an equity and that kind of overarching lens of equity really being embedded in all the work is even just thinking about the development of things like your governance structure, so integrated governance. Is it reflective of the many different perspectives that would need to inform a hub that's serving diverse youth from across your community? Thinking about your policies and procedures. Are we making them in ways that are really going to enhance access for many groups of youth and their families that are based in equity, that align with principles around anti-oppression and anti-racist practice, around trauma-informed, client-centered or youth-centered, and developmentally appropriate harm reduction principles? So really thinking about all those pieces and how they can be embedded into all of the aspects of the hub that you're generating is a really critical piece. So we often kind of say that that might not be the piece necessarily that young people interface with in terms of service, but those are the foundational pieces that will actually start to articulate how you deliver service and how you think about service. And so at the end of the day, they do impact and they do create the kind of culture of service overall. I'm trying to be fast because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Equitable and inclusive access and physical space, again, so this can be non-visible or visible, kind of barriers that may be in place for space. So really trying to understand what those barriers might be and create accessible spaces. So that can include things like physical disabilities, ensuring our spaces are accessible, signage. It can also be things like ensuring that people can access service in the language of their choice, and if they're not able to, building in processes and ways that we can support them and provide them service in a language of their choice. And so some of that might be virtual. So working on some of those pieces, trying to problem solve through those pieces is what we're focusing on for this, this component. So really, what we're talking about as we move through these equity-based principles and components is really access and ensuring that we're having the most accessible space possible, the most accessible service possible for many diverse groups of youth and their families. Equity data use, so I spoke a little bit about this. So this is twofold. For us, you can see it there. There's local and regional kind of information and data that would inform kind of the way that we're delivering service, and then there's also socio-demographic information that we're actually collecting through the DASMA that will also inform service. And so really what this is about is that we want to collect population-specific data because we want it to inform services. So again, data is used to inform service and enhance service. So this will tell us more about the young people that are walking through the doors, their families, and what kinds of services would be most appropriate for them in terms of their maybe multiple identities and experiences, and just really ensuring that our service reflects that and that we're sensitive to those pieces in relation to creating an atmosphere that's accessible and welcoming and respectful. Clinical and cultural specific services that reflect population groups. Again, so what we're focusing on here is ensuring that when we're delivering services, we're really respectful that there's many different types of ways to deliver even clinical services, depending on the experience, perspectives, and identities of a young person and their family. And so this is where we really see those kind of overarching principles be put into practice. And so what we're talking about here is that each hub will be providing French active offer to young people as they walk through the door. That hub will be operating an anti-oppressive, anti-racist practice service delivery model. They'll be implementing trauma-informed approach to care, a harm reduction philosophy and mentality in relation to delivery of service, and so really sort of having these articulated in relation to how they're going to look in practice. So there's some more information about that that we're happy to provide sort of after the fact about how that will be implemented into practice and how our hubs are thinking about doing that in practice. But this is really the component where we see those principles operationalized. So those are our 13 core components very, very quickly. I hope I provided a little bit of information. I know it's a lot to cover in an hour. Happy to take some questions as I move through these final slides. But just to say that here's some kind of tips and tricks that we like to think about as we build in sustainability. Just to say, again, that these are things that we would kind of start thinking about very, very early on. So identifying policies and practices, procedural changes that will kind of need to be implemented to hold this over time and make this the new way of working. Create space and time for coaching and skill development in an ongoing way, early days, but in an ongoing way, make that kind of the way of working. Consider what resources are needed, not just sort of now, but also into the future, and what that might look like over time. And this is something that's really obviously on our minds, as what we're trying to do here is kind of transform a system of care. And for those who are sort of located in Ontario, most of you on this call, you'll know that we have a lot of transformation happening around us in our system. So also thinking about what we're trying to do with Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario within the context of a changing Ontario system and OHTs and how that's going to look. So really making sure that we're not developing an additional silo system, but we're really thinking in a very kind of conscientious way about what the future state of this needs to look like and how it can complement a future system and not be a new silo system within it. Ongoing training and coaching, I spoke about, and formalizing partnerships. I will say that one of the things that we've definitely learned, and I'd say I've learned over sort of my last 8 years being here doing different types of system implementation work and supporting communities across this province, is that at the end of the day, it's a lot about relationships and investing in those relationships. So I think that's it's a hard one. It's a hard one to capture. It's a hard one to sort of articulate in relation to the impact that it has, but it's definitely a cornerstone of the system change work that we're all engaging in across the province, so a critical aspect. So thank you. Any questions? There's our email and our website. The last slide is really just a very tiny list of references. So obviously they're all there. You can just read them, but we're happy to sort of share that after the fact. I realize it's a little bit tiny.
So Shauna, we have a question in the chat pod from Lauren. Do you know how youth hubs will be affected by the creation of OHTs? And will you share core components and learnings with other sites hoping to create hubs?
It's a great question. I think we're all wondering how many things will be affected by OHTs. But just to say that the way that we're moving forward with Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario is really staying connected. Obviously, as I said, this is a Ministry of Health funded initiative. So just staying really connected to our ministry partners in relation to alignment and making sure that this is a model that still makes sense within the OHT world that we're moving into, and really seeing a lot of alignment between what we're doing with Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario and OHTs. So for those of you that are sort of engaging in OHT work, you'll know there's a strong focus on integration, on integrated decision making and governance. There's a strong piece around partner collaboration, and so there's a lot of kind of synergy and alignment that we just continue to kind of build upon and ensure we're staying apprised of. And so what we really envision for us is that Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario or integrated youth services in this province is a complement to an OHT framework, which is obviously very broad and focused on all of health. And what we're doing here is really focused on mental health and addiction, but recognizing that it's holistic in relation to needing to be comprehensive for young people in terms of all of their aspects of wellness. So we see it as a really aligned piece of work with similar principles. And as far as our conversations to date have been, our funders see it in the same way. So we're happy to share core components. There's actually a document. So what I've run through today is actually all encompassed within a document. And it's got a little bit more information, a little more detail than I was able to go into today. And we're going to be sharing that out. It's just being finalized. It will be available in English and French, and we're going to be putting that up on our website. youthhubs.ca, and happy to sort of send that out to this group as follow-up to this webinar if people would like. Thanks for your comment, Lisa. Andre, great question. So the question of are hubs providing harm reduction equipment to youth who use substances? So it depends on the hub, to be honest with you. Again, because this is a model that's building off of resources that are available in communities, and different communities have different access to different types of harm reduction services and supports. And so each of the hubs is working with their addiction service providers in the community and will be providing services based on resources and availability. But the harm reduction kind of approach and philosophy is one that guides operations in relation to substance use and addiction at hubs. So it sort of depends, is the answer. I think people are still typing a few questions, so while I'm waiting, I will make Heather happy and remind people to please fill out the evaluation if you can, which is under the chat list of participants. There's a link to our evaluation, so if you could please do that, that would be great, because Joanna will be doing a follow-up webinar in a couple of weeks, and so it'll be great to kind of get some feedback about what a next step in relation to type of information that you'd like would be, so we can deliver on that. Terry, do any existing hubs provide a youth-oriented safe injection drug use site? Not at this point in time. We don't have that in operation at any of the sites currently. Thanks, Paula. I think our questions, I see a few people typing, but we are coming to time. I'm happy to answer a few remaining questions if people have them, but for those that have to sign off, thank you so much for being with us. I hope it was, although a fairly high level and quick overview, at least kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to do, and hopefully you see some alignment with the work that you're doing. And as I said, happy to answer any follow-up questions and continue this conversation. We'd love to hear, and I think we want to hear as we move forward from others that are doing this work as well. So thank you to those that have to log off. Rhonda, do you have any plans to review, evaluate the core components on an ongoing basis to see if they're still relevant? And if there are other components that need to be added as time goes on? That's a great question. And so I think I have a few of my partners from FRAME that are on this webinar. So FRAME is sort of an international knowledge exchange and evaluation network. Apologies if I got that, kind of got the tagline a little wrong there for those of you who are on the webinar. But we'll be working with them to provide information about these core components. They're also working with all of those nationally and internationally that are working in integrated youth services. And in November, we're actually having a learning institute for all of those who are engaging in integrated youth services. So if you're interested in sort of attending that and sharing and being part of the conversation about what's happening in the world of integrated youth services, understanding more about core components and what type of components we think really are the components, irrespective of model or irrespective of implementation from national context and international context, that would be a great learning institute. It's in Ottawa. And if anyone from FRAME is on the line, if you want to just type in the Learning Institute dates. Thank you, Miriam and Julia. Thanks for the shout out. No problem. So that would be a great opportunity. So Rhonda, we're definitely committed to doing that and understanding more about these core components, but want to be part of the collective conversation and not doing something in a siloed way. So really working collectively and collaboratively with all of our partners via FRAME to really understand integrated youth services in the future state of this type of way of working for young people. Jimmy, hi, nice to see you. Thanks for the comment. Thanks, Rhonda. Okay, with that, I think we'll sign off. We're a few minutes over time. Thanks for hanging in there, folks. Have a great day, and as I said, please feel free to follow up, send out any emails, check out